Hello and welcome to the programme. Now, on October the 9th, Turkey launched a major military operation in northern Syria after US troops who had allied with the Kurds withdrew. The president of Turkey, Recep Tayyip Erdogan, says the offensive is aimed at removing Kurdish-led forces from the border area and creating a so-called safe zone, so millions of Syrian refugees can be returned. Now, I'm pleased to say joining us in the studio today is Yağmur Ahmet Güldere. He is the Turkish ambassador to Ukraine. Hello, Ambassador. Thank you so much for coming in.
Hello. Thanks for having me.
This story from North Syria has really captured headlines worldwide. Often a lot of emotive language is used. It's been called a Turkish invasion, a Turkish encroachment onto Syrian land, seizure, all these different terms. So before we start, can you give us Turkey's position and describe from a Turkish point of view what is happening here? And
Sure.
why is it happening?
Sure. Well, thank you very much for having me and giving me this opportunity. You're very right in saying that there is a lot of disinformation and misinformation going on. So maybe I should start by saying what we are not doing. Mm-hmm. And with that, we are not invading Syria. We are not occupying Syria. We are certainly not conducting demographic engineering. And this is not an anti-Kurdish operation, I must underline. What we are doing is a military operation whose scope and objectives are very clearly announced. Now, why are we forced into doing this? As you know, the situation in Syria has been very chaotic for many years now. And to the south of our borders, we have multiple national security threats in the form of various terrorist organizations, YPG, this is the Syria wing of the PKK, as well as the Daesh. We have been dealing with these threats for many years. As you know, in 2017, we conducted the Euphrates Shield operation, and in 2018, the Operation Olive Branch. Now, however, these two operations which we conducted were not enough to address the problems which we faced. What are these problems? From the east of Euphrates, over the last 2 years, we had more than 300 acts of hostility. And by acts of hostility, I mean sniper attacks, fatal attacks, and I mean guided anti-tank missile launches and things like that. We also have, from what we brand this corridor of terror, we have tunnels dug into our land, smuggling arms, weapons, which are given to PKK, which are in turn used to attack Turkish people in our homeland. So these are the threats that we were facing from northern Syria, but we are not the only ones who are suffered by this regime in the north. These terrorist organizations, these people have also intimidated the local Arab communities who had to flee from the land because of forced conscription, and this includes even child soldiers, issues like that. And on top of that, I must add, it's not only the ethnic Arabs who had to flee from there, even the Kurds who do not subscribe to YPG's terrorist agenda, they also had to flee. And we in Turkey are currently hosting more than 300,000 Kurdish people from Syria. So
that's your view on the Turkish position. But I want to ask about this safe zone. It's tens of kilometers, and ideally the Turkish government and the president would like to resettle the displaced people who moved from Syria to Turkey back there. Now, this has come under quite a lot of criticism, but you can understand why, no? Because if you're moving people from a place where they feel a bit safer and you're moving them back to a place that isn't so safe, surely that is a bad thing, no?
Well, let me start by saying that we have been hosting 4 million Syrian refugees in Turkey. We have been assisting 3 million IDPs within Syria, so that makes 7 million. And this is a very sizable population, as you will agree. And when we hear from countries who are hundreds or thousands of kilometers away, how we are risking the situation of refugees and IDPs. Frankly speaking, we feel like being subject to a double standard, because those who are not doing even half of what we're doing keep criticizing us like that. Now, about this safe zone which we're trying to establish, this is basically a 30 to 40 kilometer in depth and about 444 kilometers from the east of Euphrates to the Iraqi border. Now, in this area, we will ensure that the people who want to go back will have the chance to do so. And in this part of Syria, people have actually been demographically engineered in the past when the YPG was there. So people had to flee their homeland. After the operation and this region is secured, those who want to go back will be able to do so.
So it's optional then?
We're not sending anyone back. We're not pushing anyone back. Those who want to go back will be able to do so in a safe and secure manner. That's what we're doing.
So how many people, a rough estimate, do you think, or what sort of percentage of people do you think will move back to Syria? Is there a calculation?
Well, as a result of the two operations we conducted earlier, 360,000 Syrians went back. Now, the scope of this operation is a bit larger, so we can estimate about 1 to 2 million Syrians who might be wishing to go back. But of course, since this is a voluntary process, it's impossible to say this many people will be going back, because we are just providing the conditions for them to be able to return.
But do you think that this settlement is also quite a risk for the Turkish authorities? Because actually there is a chance that it might create more instability on Turkey's southern border, because perhaps if these Syrians who are currently in Turkey return home, thousands of Syrians, then again on the border there will be stirred up rivalries, there will be different provocations that might happen with the local Kurdish population that's already there. So is there a risk that Turkey is willing to take?
Well, again, I will refer to the results of our previous operations, because as a result of the Euphrates Shield and Olive Branch operations, we managed to secure an area of over 2,000 square kilometers, where, as I said, 360,000 people returned, and things are moving very smoothly there. The local people established councils to govern their work. They have absolutely no issues, and we have been providing them all sorts of assistance given their current difficulties. So I see no reason why this time the situation should be different.
Now in northern Syria, there's some quite famous pictures now from the recent days of military vehicles flying Russian flags, and obviously the back of Syrian government, the Assad regime, is backed by Russia and Iran predominantly. So what sort of problem has the US withdrawal created, firstly for Turkish and US relations? Is there a strain now? How would you evaluate that? And also, what sort of risks and opportunities are there for Turkey with Russia filling the void?
Now, on Turkish-American relations, we have been allies for many years. We believe we have a time-tested partnership, and we believe we are still allies. But when we hear all these comments saying how America is betraying its allies and letting Turks kill the Kurds, this sort of rhetoric, I don't think it's helping anyone. It's certainly not helping Turkish public opinion feel like allies with the Americans. And I think there is a huge problem of rhetoric and communication here. We are allies, and as allies we need to provide security to one another, not do the opposite. While despite what we have been saying for many years now, what some of our allies did was basically arming a terrorist group to the teeth in order to have it fight with another terrorist group, without looking at what security risks this will pose to another ally.
But I mean, the Syrian conflict, and I don't think we should call it a Syrian conflict. There is elements of a civil war. There is international intervention. It's not a civil war in Syria. The Syrian Democratic Forces, others argue, have fought Daesh or Islamic State, and arguably they have helped Turkey in a way, no?
Well, actually, we are able to do our fighting for ourselves, thank you. And as a result of the operations which we conducted in the past, these two operations, we eliminated about 8,000 terrorists. And Turkey is the only NATO country whose soldiers had chest-to-chest combat with Daesh forces. So I don't think anyone is in a position to teach us what to do or how to fight with Daesh. These Daesh people, they didn't just pop out of ground. They came from certain countries. We also look at the reasons for that, why they were actually let travel to the region in the first place. We had to deal with the results of those. So coming back to your previous question, we did our best to communicate with our allies and our partners within the coalition against Daesh to relay our concerns and have the necessary steps taken. But sadly, all of these remained inconclusive, and we were left with no choice but to launch this offensive.
Yeah, and it seems that Recep Tayyip Erdogan is taking the risk, because Donald Trump said just hours ago that there would be huge consequences for Turkey, I would imagine in terms of sanctions, although I believe that actually there's not so much physical trade between the US and Turkey. It's minimal compared to other partners, but perhaps access to Western banking structures, this sort of thing could be affected. Are you worried about any possible US sanctions that might be coming your way?
Well, I mean, I'll have to highlight three things here. One, when you're sanctioning an ally, you have to think of it in long term, and what this causes in the fabric of the alliance itself. Second, when you put a halt on military sales to an ally, then when that ally goes and starts arms procurement from other sources, then you won't be in a position to criticize that ally. That's number two. And for number three, we are currently in a position where we fear for our national security. And what preoccupies us is the amount of weapons and the attacks we are subject to from our southern borders, from this corridor of terror. So if we are going to be subject to sanctions for providing our own national security, then I don't think this will help anyone. But we are not just going to abandon this operation just because we are being threatened with all this.
You have many years' experience working particularly about the Turkish-Ukraine relations, but also in general in terms of Eastern Europe as well. And often when we cover these events, we hear that external threats are often used as the reason for military intervention, when actually it's to boost the internal popularities, really, of politicians. We know that according to several ratings agencies who do polls on the public support for Recep Tayyip Erdogan, that his support is going down. So do you think it's a fair argument that actually this military intervention is seen as a negative thing generally in, for example, the US or the UK, but actually is quite positive for Erdogan for his internal rating?
Well, this operation has been endorsed and supported by the mainstream opposition parties in Turkey. So people are united in addressing this issue. I don't think the issue at stake here is upcoming elections or popularity of our president or not. All the parliament, it has united behind this operation. It has rallied behind this operation. I can.
But President Erdogan is the leader, you could say, the leading voice of this operation. So it's going to benefit him. No?
Well, he is. But if this was just a personal PR-oriented military operation, then I don't think the opposition parties who had very severe competition with AK Party, President Erdogan's party, and who actually won a number of high-caliber cities in the municipal elections, would be supporting this operation. So, I mean, Turkish public opinion is united behind this operation. I mean, there should be no doubt about that. It's very clear. People are fed up with this corridor of terror, and people want to see an end to this. These operations I described, the ones we conducted in 2017 and 18, we lost more than 100 of our children, of our soldiers there. So they come at a cost. But the cost of not conducting this operation will be even higher for us. So everyone understands it, and everyone is adamantly behind this operation.
We've talked a lot about the Turkish-US relations, but how would you evaluate relations between Turkey and Russia?
Well, Russia is a country in our region, and we have been living together with Russia for about 1,000 years since Turks entered Anatolia. The relations have seen their ups and downs, but I think we are now in a position where we have come to a mature stage, at a pragmatic stage. There are issues where we agree, and there are issues where we disagree. So on issues where we agree, we are cooperating and moving ahead. In some sectors or on some issues where we disagree, but that's a fact of life. And countries do not necessarily see eye to eye on many issues, even if you're allies with one another. So that is basically where we are. We have a sizable trade with Russia. And I, from time to time, see criticisms in Ukraine about our relations with Russia.
Yeah. Well, actually, I think it's an interesting point to talk about this, because Crimea is obviously one of the main areas where Turkey and Russia do disagree. Although I do remember there were a couple of, I think it was the so-called Crimean prosecutor who was actually greeted by President Tayyip Erdogan recently. So how does Turkey deal with handling relations with Russia, but also keeping support for Crimea as part of Ukraine?
Well, we have been very clear and consistent on Crimea since 2014. We did not recognize the annexation. We are not recognizing the annexation. This issue which you touched upon, it was basically President Erdogan shaking the hands of foreign guests at a multilateral event. So we are not talking about a bilateral visit where we have long established programs and all that. We have spoken with the Ukrainian authorities in Ankara and in Kiev about this issue. And I again underline once more that our position on Crimea is still the same. We do not recognize the annexation, and we will keep supporting Ukraine's territorial integrity, and we will support Crimean Tatars.
When you say supporting the territorial integrity, what do you mean by that? Often this word support is used very often, but what does that mean in real terms?
Well, what that means in real terms is when Ukraine, in international platforms, goes ahead and takes initiatives regarding reaffirming the territorial integrity of Ukraine, including Crimea and Donbas, you can always see Turkey siding with Ukraine right next to it. When in the UN General Assembly, Ukraine tables a resolution on these, you can see Turkey supporting that. And we, based on this, we view Ukraine as a strategic partner. We value our relations with Ukraine. And I think the position of Turkey on Crimea is very principled. So that's why both Russia and Ukraine understand it, and we are able to keep on with our relations with both of them in a constructive manner.
I just want to make it clear before we move on that it was actually two members of the Russian parliament from the annexed Crimea, including Natalia Poklonskaya, who was the ex-prosecutor, or so-called ex-prosecutor of Crimea, and another Crimean star who were greeted and allowed to participate. Let's talk about Ukraine-Turkey relations now. Obviously, there's a lot we could talk about in terms of trade, culture. So let's start with trade.
Sure.
First of all, this is developing all the time. What are the priorities for bilateral cooperation in terms of economy and trade?
Well, in Turkey, we have a saying, water finds its way. In the 10 months that I spent here as ambassador and in my previous capacity, I have witnessed truly a great potential between Turkish and Ukrainian economies. There are a number of areas where our economies complement one another in a very positive way. And our traders, our investors are already moving in the right direction in terms of these.
What sort of areas?
Well, agriculture, construction, renewable energy, but not only these, because we are talking about $4 billion of trade between Turkey and Ukraine. We have some traditional items, commodities such as steel products or textiles or obviously agriculture when you're talking about Ukraine.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
$4 billion is not something to sniff at, but everyone who is working on the field believe that this could go far higher.
And what would make it go far higher? What are you looking for?
One of the key things is to have this free trade agreement, which we have been negotiating for a long time, to sign it in the earliest time possible. Obviously, I mentioned that there are areas where we complement one another, but there are areas where we are rivals.
So what are you looking for in terms of rivalry, solving the rivalry?
I am basically expecting our economic experts to come up with a golden median where we will have a win-win agreement. And I am sure our people have the technical expertise to come up with that. We certainly have the political backing, because when President Zelensky went to Turkey in August, both presidents clearly stated their wish to see the trade rise to $10 billion annually.
Yeah. So what is this golden thing that you're looking for from a non-technical point of view?
Well, obviously, when you're talking about a free trade agreement between countries of Turkey and Ukraine scale, there are lots of details, and devil always lies in the details. So we are talking about certain periods of non-tariffs, certain quotas, and all of that, and we're talking about hundreds of commodities. So. What I loved about President Zelensky in Turkey, one thing which I think stepped forward was when he said kazan kazan, which is win-win in Turkish. So that should be the spirit which guides us. Obviously, when Turkish agriculture sector hears about free trade agreement with Ukraine, they have their concerns. Or when people in Ukraine hear about free trade agreement with Turkey, those in textile sector have their concerns. These are legitimate concerns, obviously, and we want everybody to look to feel safe. But these actually remind me of the situation of pre-customs union we had with EU back in '95. There were all sorts of scenarios. People were saying our economy is going to be devastated. Turkey's economy will get demolished. But today, Turkey has an economy which exports high-tech goods to United States and Europe. And that is partly due to the competition which we achieved as a result of this customs union. So this free trade agreement, I think, is doable, and it's a win-win solution to all of us, and it will help us increase the foreign trade to $10 billion.
Yeah. So that's your hope $10 billion.
Yes.
Okay, we'll have to keep an eye out
10
for that.
billion, yeah.
Our final question is about culture, actually. You mentioned before the interview that there will be a Turkish week of culture, if I'm not mistaken. Can you tell us a bit more about that and what the plans are?
Well, Turkey, one of our fortes, obviously, is tourism. So we have about 1.5 million Ukrainians going to Turkey every year, and we have about 300,000 Turks coming to Ukraine. Now, one peculiar aspect of tourism is it raises an awareness and curiosity about one another. So based on that, we have the Turkish Cultural Center here, and they have been conducting language courses, but also some cultural activities. And looking at the interest in Turkish language and culture, we decided to organize a few events and combine them within what we call Days of Turkish Culture, or Week of Turkish Culture, if you may. We are planning to organize a few events. These will include Days of Turkish Coffee, the Ebru paintings. We will have a competition on paintings by Ukrainians on Turkey, how they did it. We will have Days of Turkish Cuisine. And as a flagship event, we will have what I hope will be a great concert by three very prominent musicians. These will be Mr. Botvinov, the famous Ukrainian pianist, his percussion partner, Mr. Burhan Öcal, and their Crimean Tatar partner, Enver Ismagilov, and this will be taking place towards the end of October. All of these events will be at the end of October, so we hope that this will help partially address the interest of Ukraine's public about Turkish days, Turkish culture.
Absolutely. I think I might go myself, especially for the coffee and the concert. It sounds very good.
Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Ambassador, for coming in, and hopefully we'll see you again soon.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
That was Yağmur Ahmet Güldere, the Turkish ambassador to Ukraine. Thanks for watching, and stay tuned for more here on UATV.